fall, so let's keep him and also Janice in our prayers. Pardon? Could have left that one out. Now, I make fun of myself when I fall, so I can at least mention your fall. In the Rosie household, they've just had numerous things going on. Tina had to take Tina in for some shots. She has a reoccurrence or bout of mono, which means she's weak as water right now. Her and Tina's son Josh has had knee surgery, ACL, isn't it? Meniscus or somewhere. Anyway, he had knee surgery, and this is about the fourth time for that. And then one of her brothers had open heart surgery. Brother-in-law's four bypasses. Barbara Little, if you didn't get the email, she listed all the folks of hers that were needing care. And then yesterday got an email from her that one of her nieces, they found her and one of her friends in a truck under a bridge on Highway 22, deceased in the truck. So no more details on that. So it's another family we've got to keep in our prayers. How's the Moody family? Great. Well, but getting this far along, that's great. Yeah, good news. Is there anybody that I've missed that's on the sick or injured list or traveling? Jackie, I saw. Huh? Jackie has Bell's palsy. Didn't know that. She looked good the last time I saw her. She had recovered from her other illness. But if you don't know anything about Bell's palsy, that's just caused by a virus, and it just basically one side of the face or the other, it just sort of numbs it and droops it for a while, but it'll circulate and get back to okay. It's just more of an aggravation than anything else. So yours is called by old day. A few of us droop because of that. Yes, ma'am. Who was? Your uncle. Okay. Well, I guess I misspoke because now they're. I thought they were out of town all weekend. You got him back to his new duty station, though, right? Very good, very good. If that's all the announcements, then Brother Cox, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day that we gathered together here to study portions of truth. We pray that all the things that we say and do according to your will. We pray also that gathered together, we will enjoy each other's faith. Heavenly Father, be with those of our known that are sick, that are traveling, pray that you be the recovery, that those that are safe. Be with us this morning as we study, forgive us of those wrongs, committed, strengthen us today. So we pray in Christ's name.
Remind us again where he's stationed now. Cherry Point, North Carolina. So everybody can pay attention to the weather and everything else. And I did forget one other person that's very important. Miss Lisa is traveling again tomorrow, going back to Utah for another treatment. So Genesis chapter 39. While y'all are turning to Genesis chapter 39, just remind you that in a couple of weeks, a gospel meeting, not about a couple of weeks, a gospel meeting will be coming up. Next Saturday, there will be a door knocking. We'll probably get here about 9:30, hope to get in the area by 10. And then the following Saturday, there will also be a door knocking or a pamphlet pass out to invite people to the meeting. So anybody that can and will, put that on your calendar, because I know one of the weeks, not this coming Saturday, but the following Saturday, Andrea and I will be out of town on our semi-annual trek to Arkansas, checking on her mom and all. So, but any help in that area would be greatly appreciated. Genesis chapter 39. Wednesday night, Brother Terry got us down through verse 8. And we're in a section now that can move relatively quickly. So I'm not going to necessarily take time to stop and pause on each verse and talk about it. But there are a couple of verses throughout the next couple of chapters or so that I've got highlighted that I think are worthy of our stopping and mentioning. And we're starting with verse 9, the one we're talking about. If you remember through Wednesday night, Joseph had been in the house of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife had been trying to get him to lie with her and things like that, and he had been refusing. And she had also, so this is where we're picking up. And if you look at the wording here in verse 9, it says, this is Joseph talking, says, "There is none greater in this house than I. Neither hath he kept anything from me but thee. Because thou art his wife, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Now, if you look at it from one respect, you could say he's kind of bragging, isn't he? There's nobody in this house greater than me. Is that Potiphar? The other way, and the way I prefer to look at it, is he is just stating the facts. Potiphar put him in charge of everything in that household, even the care and well-being of his wife. So when he is making that statement, he is not bragging. He is telling her a fact. And also he is, I guess you could say he is thankful for that purpose, that he's has gratitude toward his master, who's Potiphar, for putting him in that position. And then the second part of that is, how can I do this great wickedness? So he shows gratitude toward his earthly master and fear from his heavenly master. We use the word fear, but and I've used it all my life because that's the way the Bible writes it. But we should translate that word in most cases when we're talking about this as respect. He has respect for his heavenly Father. So, a lot of times if you do something out of fear, you really want to do it, but you're afraid to do it. But here, if you do it, if you do something because of the respect you have for someone, you don't want to do it. You don't want to disappoint that person. So there's the differences there between those two. And to me, when I read that verse, it just comes across to me as he is grateful for his master having that kind of confidence in him, and he will not disappoint God. So, questions or comments? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. He definitely knows God. Now, I'm going to ask you sort of a trick question. How long has he been in Potiphar's household at this time? Any ideas? Any guesses? As we go through here and get into other chapters, we're going to find out, if you read this in line, what's the next thing that she's going to do? He's going to refuse, but he's going to run out of his cloak. Therefore, she's going to make up a lie. He's going to go into prison. I'm fast forwarding through just to give us an overview of where we're going to go back to. She's going to, and basically Potiphar then puts him in prison. Then a baker and a butler are cast in the same prison. If you read through that, they're in there for a season. Now, a season could be a quarterly season, or most people think of it as being a year. Then Joseph tells them to remember him when they're out. But then 2 years later, the baker remembers this. So as you go along here, and then it tells when he interprets the dream for the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh gives him a wife, he is 30 years old. So if he is 30 years old when he interprets that dream for Pharaoh and gets a wife, if you back that up, the baker's been out of jail for 2 years. If he was in for a year, that means 3. Daniel had just recently been put in there. So if you take that away from 30, how old is Daniel at that point? Well, he marries at 30. Joseph, I'm sorry, I'm skipping way ahead in the Bible. So if you back things up, he's probably been in Potiphar's house at this point about 9 years or so, right? Because he was 17 when he got there. So 9 years would put him at the age of about 26. You know, and when I'm talking ages, remember, I always want to give myself a year or two leeway either side here. But roughly, you could say he had been in Potiphar's house at this point 7 to 9 years. Now, why was Potiphar's wife trying to entice him to be with her? Or I look at it a different way. Why do women normally cheat on a husband, or vice versa? Wish you could answer that. Well, a lot of times is because they just don't like them the way they used to. They don't respect them the way they used to. Or it could just come down to the point of being plain evil. They're just that kind of person. We don't know. But I throw a lot of that out just to try to stir up your minds. Brother Golden? I have read those also, and it is, and even though a lot of times we would think of a eunuch as not being married or having a household, that they did own houses and did marry and such. So that also is a possibility. Anything else? Nobody's gonna know. Yeah. He could have made a bunch of excuses and did it, but God would know. And that's the same way with, since I mentioned him way out of turn, same thing happened to Daniel. Daniel went to a foreign land, and could have used all kinds of excuses, but he stood firm and found his way out of a bad situation. All right. So if we go back then to verse 10, as the days happen and everything, this is where he gets caught. Verse 14, after he flees again and leaves his garment, she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. All right. At this point, she is probably just totally aggravated, mad, lashes out, calls the men of the house to solidify her story. But who is she blaming? She's not blaming herself because she's trying to entice him. She's not blaming Joseph because he did anything. She's blaming her husband. And this is one reason where I sort of lean toward the fact that she just don't like him. Or as Brother Golden said, there could be other issues. But she blames her husband for bringing in this Hebrew. And then if we go on down to verse 20, Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. The part that we skipped just is the part where she talks to her husband and accuses him. I want to ask you a question, just speculate for a minute. What do you think is going through Potiphar's mind? Apparently, Potiphar really liked and trusted this man, or else he would not have put him in the position he was in. Now his wife makes this accusation. Do you think he might have some mixed thoughts about what's going on? If she had not given him any reason to distrust her before, he has to trust her. He's married to her, right? Yeah. Yeah, if he had been caught in, if one were caught in the act of something like that, or there was no doubt, the master had all the right in the world to put the person to death. God had other plans, so, but he put him in prison there. Well, that could be true too. He could have been aggravated. He could have known his wife was doing it, but yet he still had to do something. So, yes, sir. I'm sorry? Right. There were none other. Right. He put him in the, I guess, the lesser of evils at this point here. Now, Brother Conch. Brother Clunch just said this is the second time his outer garment has gotten him in trouble. We'll get then down to verse 22 and 23. Those go together. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. All right. he's in prison. Now, normally when a person goes to prison, the guards have total control, right? Until they learn somebody's behavior where they might give them a little bit of extra leeway. Apparently here, as soon as Joseph went in, these guards must have known of Joseph's reputation because of who Potiphar was, and he put all the prisoners basically in the charge of Joseph, Joseph taking care of them. So Joseph was being treated a little bit more leniently here, even in a lenient prison, than most prisoners. And some of you have said it, the Lord made it to prosper. So the Lord was with him. The Lord had a little bit of guidance going on in this region here. But now he's in prison. Questions, comments? Yes, sir, Brother Golan. Trying to cover herself. And he wouldn't have done it, but do you think maybe that she went ahead and called out and took this approach because she was afraid that Joseph might have told Potiphar what was going on? Don't know, don't say, just thought. Any other questions on chapter 39 then, or comments? Okay, as we get into chapter 40, we're still dealing with the butler and the baker that's been put into prison. Verse 3, it says, and he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. The only thing I want to point out here is in ward, which is in King James, which I grew up on, comfortable with, but basically, if you look at the modern King James or some others, in ward just means in custody. So he put them in custody. Somebody had charge over them. And then when we get down to verse 5, it says, they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler, the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. Now, the reason that I want to pause on this one for just a second, how many of us in here dream? Every one of us at one time or another, right? I probably, as most of you, dream almost every night. Don't remember them. How many times do you wake up remembering that you had a dream? Some, especially if it's a scary dream. Also, as we go along this line, we're getting into a little bit of psychology here, but as we go along in line on this thought, how many of you have dreamed a dream and when you woke up that morning, you remembered it, and that afternoon, you couldn't remember the dream? Well, the thing I'm pointing out here is this dream is not your standard dream. This is a prophetical dream that they're having, all right? Because then they are interpreted by Joseph, which no need to interpret simple dreams. Now, I know that in the field of the occult and everything, there's a lot of people that believe heavily in dreams, but if it were something where in the Bible where somebody dreamed a dream or had a vision or something, that was because it was directed, prophetical. People today who dream dreams, it is just the unconscious mind having a field trip. No rhyme or reason to some of the dreams we have. Yeah, yeah. Well, back in those days, it was legal. Well, yeah, and it hadn't been too long in our recent history here in the United States where the guardian of the prisons could take prisoners out to do personal work and things of that nature. But down to verse 8, it says, "And they said unto him," talking about the dream, "We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me then, I pray you." Which this gets over to another section of scripture that talks about uh, not dealing with soothsayers or necromancers or, talking to the dead. You're not to delve in stuff like that. And here Joseph is just pointing out that if someone has a dream, that there is no mortal that can interpret that dream. For somebody to interpret a dream, it has to be some divine knowledge coming down. And then they told him the dream, and when we get down to verse 12, it said, Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee into thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. Joseph is not happy being in prison. He wants to be free again, or at least out of that house and out of the prison. And he had told the butler a positive outcome on his dream. 3 days, Pharaoh's going to get you out of here, and you're going to be restored to your place. Get down to verse 15. Joseph is now talking to the baker. Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee. Not the same as just lift up the head, is it? Now he's going to lift it off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat the flesh from off thee. I wouldn't be very happy if I asked somebody, and my uncle, one of my uncles, he was smart, he had a lot of common sense, but he would go to fortune tellers and they'd read his palm and he put a lot of stock in what they were saying, and I just never did understand it. But here, Joseph tells this guy that he's going to lose his head. Skipping down to verse 21, Pharaoh did restore the chief butler unto his butlership again, and gave him the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. What had Joseph asked of them when he was going to interpret their dream? Speak kindly of me to Pharaoh. Verse 23 says, Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. Do you think that is forget in the sense that we think of forget today? I mean, if something, Andrea can tell me that she wants me to do something, and if I walk around the corner, I might not remember it. Or do you think that he was just, I'm free now, and just not put much stock in trying to remember that what he was told? Just blew him off, so to speak. Anything then on chapter 40? Brother Golden, excuse me, Joel? Might have been afraid to mention it at that point, right? Brother Golden? Uh-huh. Right. Well, he was stolen in that respect, and also his life was stolen from him by the false accusation of Potiphar's wife. So, uh, yeah. Anything else on 40? 41. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. This is where I come up with my 2 years dealing with the time framing and all, and putting Joseph in Potiphar's house for around 8 years, plus or minus a year or two. And Pharaoh is dreaming at this point. Now we get down to verse 8. Came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told him his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Why do you think none of them even tried to tell him something that wasn't quite right, just to put his mind at ease and get themselves out from under his eyesight, or being wrong could have dire consequences? It was better to be ignorant than to be wrong. They might have remembered what happened to the baker. And then in verse 9, then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. That's kind of a weird way to saying, I remember this guy. But he's telling Pharaoh, again, when they feared God, it was out of respect, but when they feared Pharaoh, it was out of fear. So here he says, I remember my faults. You put me in prison, but now I remember this guy that, verse 12. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored into mine office, and him he hanged. So he's not only telling Pharaoh that Joseph was an interpreter of dreams, but that he was accurate. He told it like it was. In verse 14, Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself, changed his raiment, and came unto Pharaoh. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it, and I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. Pay attention to Joseph's answer. Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. All along through here, Joseph is given credit where credit is due. I'm not doing it. I have a hotline to God. He's given me the answers, and I'm not trying to make mockery of it. I'm trying to just, but this is the way it's coming down, that God has given me the information to give to you. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, and then he told him his dream. When we get to verse 25, Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. Now remember, he had had 2 dreams. One of them had to do with what? Cows. The other one had to do with what? Wheat. But now Joseph is telling them that they're one dream, or they're connected. The 7 good kind are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. So there's not going to be 14 years here. There's only going to be 7. In essence, the second dream just reinforced the first dream. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kind that came upon them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted by the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine. And all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following. For it shall be very grievous. You know, when I get to this section right here, I often think of the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma back in the day. What was the reason for the Dust Bowl? Pardon? The land was so great, they were raising crops. I mean, they were what we would consider today bumper crops. But because they didn't know what was going to take place by removing all the grass and turning everything into field, they removed everything that helped ground down, and then the storm came and the winds blew and the Dust Bowl happened. So nobody remembers those years of plenty before the Dust Bowl. What makes the news today? The Dust Bowl. So here, that's just my warped way of looking at things. But here's the same way that Joseph is telling him, it don't matter about all this good stuff that's going to happen for 7 years. When this is gone, you're going to be in dire straits, and the worst is going to happen. And then he goes on to say in verse 33, now let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of all those good years that come and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh. And let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? If you think about it for just a second, all the people, well, let's just look at the state of Alabama by comparison. If we absolutely knew something bad was going to happen in the state of Alabama, and that we had 7 years to get ready for it, and then we was going to live through it for 7 years, of all the people we have in Alabama, who would you look to appoint to be in charge? And if you were the governor, who would you be looking for? Here, the Pharaoh is looking for somebody to put in charge of a major, major program. Now, by all the people of Egypt, the only one that comes to his mind is the guy he just got out of prison that could tell him his dream. Now, true, God had a hand in this. God had a hand in it. But look at Pharaoh. He got this guy out of prison that could tell him the dream. He went a little bit farther and told him how to prepare and what to do. He never says, let me handle it. I can do it. But this is what you need to do. You look for somebody to do this. And then Pharaoh looks back at Joseph. Joseph has a track record. Potiphar's house, prison, interpreter of dreams. But the main point is he had a relationship with God, because all the way through every dream that he interpreted, he said it was God. He gave credit to God. So Pharaoh, and that's the reason I think that Pharaoh asked the question the way he did. Where can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And he goes right back then to Joseph. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet. Joseph didn't brag. Joseph gave credit to God. He was discreet. He was wise because to give him the path out of it. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. We can go all the way back to Joseph and his dreams that he told his brothers. This was forecast. When he got to Potiphar's house, who was the greatest one in Potiphar's house besides Potiphar? Joseph. In prison, where was Joseph in the lineup? Well, the captain of the guard, the chief man, but then Joseph was in charge of it. Now, when we get him out and he goes to the Pharaoh, who's the greatest person in the land other than Pharaoh? Joseph. Once Pharaoh elevated him to that position, he was now over his former bosses, the guard, and over his former master, Pharaoh, Potiphar. So nobody in the land greater than Joseph at this point. He gets more than those two pieces of garments back, because the next line here, next verse, Pharaoh took off the ring from his hand and put it on Joseph. That was the symbol of his authority at that point. They used signet rings and such as being their symbols of authority. And arrayed him in vestures of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. He is now more gloriously dressed than he had ever been before. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. Again, this is a position of respect, of honor. Pharaoh's in the first chariot, and Joseph is in the second. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. This is what Brother Dave was commenting on. This verse here just spelled it out, that even Potiphar, who used to be your boss, he can't move without your say-so. In verse 45, Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And that's the way I tied it together, getting back to how long he had been in his house. But now Pharaoh not only put him second in the lineup, he also gave him the wife of a priest. And Brother Clark can pick up here Wednesday night. Thank y'all so much for your attention and your comments.